Good morning and a very warm welcome to all the members who have joined for this VCM on the purchase price allocation vis-a-vis the fair value. We have with us CAMP Vijay Kumar, the Vice Chairman of the Valuation Standard Board. Our guest speaker for today, CA Faisal Lakhani, CA Anil Bhandari, who will be joining very shortly, and my colleague in the board, Sarika Singhal. Well, the topic is very interesting in the sense that if we look at the business dynamics today and the way the business combination space is happening, worldwide, the data is that the M&A activity in 2020 was about USD 3.6 trillion. And this was involving about 47,000 deals in all sectors, be it technology, financials, industrials, or the consumer staples. And the beauty was that while we were undergoing through a pandemic stage, 2.3 trillion of this M&A activity happened in second half of 2020. And the cross-border M&A international that amounted for about 12%. If we look at the Indian scenario, that is also not very different. And in 2021, we have 119 deals amounting to 3.8 billions. And this is much over and above the 86 deals which happened in the full 12 months, and the Indian figures of 2021 are just for the period January to July. Now, these are the disclosed deals and the undisclosed ones, and the actual value could be very high. Now, what does this signify? Possibly M&A as an important component of the growth story, and the tendency of the corporates to take bolder bets. And gone are the days of possibly the organic growth or the sui generic approach of the businesses. And we have seen very offensive and defensive M&As taking place, whether the intent was to move on synergistic lines or disruptive. But the idea was to scale, upgrade the scale and technology, and possibly be relevant for the future. If we look at the overall M&A space, more than the domestic acquisitions, we have seen the international acquisitions happening, and some of the contemporary economies, they have been using mode of things like SPACs, IPOs, or greenfield ventures. While in Indian context, SPACs may not be possible, but de-SPAC transaction possibly that in times to come may be becoming relevant. Now, if you see the business mutations taking place, we have the mutation of B2C now conversing to B2B or G2C, and ultimately C2G, C2C, all that happening up. So what happens is in a business combination, there is an entity who is going to be the acquirer. It takes control of another entity, which is the target. And the acquirer treat the target firms as an investment. So how we are going to account it? So in purchase acquisition accounting, because the acquirer is taking the control of the acquiree's assets, liabilities, and operations. So it recognizes and measures the assets, minuses the liabilities assumed at their fair value on the date of control, in lieu of the consideration transferred. So, and there is no pooling of the asset. Now, why this concept is going to become more important? Because there is increased shareholder activism, and many of the actions are liable either for public scrutiny or the regulatory scrutiny. So what we are trying to do is assets minus liabilities, book value, increase to the fair value, plus the intangibles, intangible assets, and the goodwill. So these components, while the tangibles have been accounted at the fair value, but in regard to the intangibles and the goodwill, since they are going to affect the future earnings, the balance sheet, and the financial ratios, but also they have the tax implications, and we also see the OECD guidelines on BEPS. So the PPA as a model, when we are trying to do the financial reporting in terms of accounting of business combination, so the facts and circumstances which the company tried to do as a rationale for the transaction, and in terms of identifying the assets, the intangible ones, like brand, trademarks. So these are barriers. These are barriers to entry, but the company has consolidated. They may not lie in the balance sheet of that company, but they are having legitimate rights of enforcement. And in view that the new company is going to take them up, so how it is to be accounted for? Is it the useful remaining life? And in terms of the financial models, I think the guest speaker would talk about them. But basically, when somebody is acquiring the target company, so they are believing in a growth trajectory and believing in a narrative that something over a period of time it is going to happen. Many a times in Indian scenario and globally, we have seen that these transactions did not turn out the way, and we tried with some hallucination, became illusion, and ultimately delusion. So I think the valuation part of intangibles, in terms of not only the intangibles, the patents, copyrights, the dealer distribution agreements, many of whom may be guided by non-compete agreements. But if you look at the factor investing, as also the macroeconomic factors, the style factors, the risk dimensions of asset classes. So I think these are the facts which the valuation expert has to take into account. With this brief introduction, and I think the another dimension which I must add is, while we are talking today of the accounting aspect of PPA, there is another enactment which comes into play, mainly the Antitrust Act, globally Competition Act in India. So how the things are to take place if they are touching a specifically trigger in terms of whether it is a financial investment or takeover transaction, because what we are talking of, the not the asset acquisition but the acquisition of the businesses. So to I think demystify some of these things, and we have a very expert gentleman today, CA Faisal Lakhani, who is accredited in business valuation from American Institute of Certified Public Account. He's also a member of ICAI and is also associated with the Certified Financial Accountants. He specializes in the functional domain of financial reporting and valuation services practice. And he has been guiding the businesses in US and other parts of the globe on valuation of businesses, intangible assets, ESOPs, and other instruments. So with these words, over to you, CA Anil Bhandari ji, for taking forward the proceedings of this session.
Thank you, Rakesh ji. A very warm welcome to CA Faisal. Pleasure to have you here. And of course, my friend MPV, and thank you, Sarika, for putting together the script again. And Rakesh ji, I keep saying that, you know, sometimes you use these amazing words, delusion and hallucination in a very, I wouldn't say a relevant, but a very interesting connotation that you seem to make during your presentations and opening remarks. And I think you do really set the stage for people to ponder upon the complexity even before we get into the complexity. So I think it's a very interesting topic today. I couldn't overcome my thoughts on how to value a company. Now we come to the thoughts about how do you value a company and how do you report the valuation finally when you do an M&A. So I think this is going to be a very, very interesting subject. It's all over for MPV because that I think is his strength. And I'm sure Faisal is going to find it difficult for questions coming in from MPV. So that's going to be very, very interesting because you have an expert, a super expert asking a super expert. So that's going to be very interesting. And I would love to understand, how do you really account for an organization which has no assets, for example? So something like a something like an Insta being paid $20 billion by a Facebook, and how do you finally report that M&A into your balance sheet when well, practically there is nothing in terms of assets. Of course, there are consumers, customers, some intangibles, and so on and so forth. So I think this one topic worth really understanding for me, at least. So wouldn't waste too much time. MPV, it's all yours. I'm going to be on the sides. I'll keep poking you because you know that standards are always my. I wouldn't say my. How should I put it? I would always want to struggle with these standards to get them right. Right. I know we are not getting out of standards, but I would want to struggle with the financial reporting standards to make sure that we have a world free of standards. To you, MPV, let's have a fantastic day today.
Thanks, Anil. In fact, I'm so glad that you conceptualized this via Sunday events. It's gone off so well and got the excellent subject matter experts. In fact, for me, the biggest discovery, of course, I've worked with Rakesh very closely, and probably amongst all the council members, maybe I would have worked much more closer with him than anyone else. And I've always admired him, but for every week, the kind of relevant preparation he does, it doesn't come very easy, unless somebody is so very committed to the cause of the profession and the brand institute, it doesn't come. So thanks, Rakesh, on behalf of all the members of the institute for the kind of quality efforts you're putting in to set the tone relevant, because each Sunday is a different topic. So he prepared so very relevant to the topic. In fact, for a moment, I thought I was sitting in an accounting standards board meeting. The way he was speaking about allocation, purchase consideration. Thanks, Rakesh. Really proud of you. Okay. So Faisal, thanks for accepting our invite and being here. Let's get to a very simple beginning of explaining to the participants who have joined us today, what do we mean by purchase price allocation? Many have an impression that it's a terminology which is there in accounting standards or defined in accounting standards as well. So I would like you to clear that myth and set the context for our subsequent discussions. Over to you, Faisal.
Absolutely. Thank you, MPV, and thank you, Mr. Rakesh, for the introduction, and Mr. Anil as well. So first of all, a very good morning to everyone. Thank you for having me here. While purchase price allocation, this is something which is a good question. I'm sorry. But sorry about that. Yeah, sorry about that. So this is a good question to start with. Now, purchase price. So purchase price allocation is something which is kind of new from an Indian standpoint, but we have been helping companies like Indian multinational companies for all of their acquisitions in the United States, as well as in North America, United States, as well as in Europe. So purchase price allocation is something, that has been there for quite some time now. Although, as I said, it's a little new for India perspective, but we have good amount of time that we've been doing this. So there are some practical aspects that I will be sharing while we are discussing this topic, as we go ahead. So to answer MPV's question, the answer is no. The term purchase price allocation is actually not something that is defined in the accounting standard, but rather in practice, it refers to the exercise of allocating what we call as the purchase price that is paid for the acquisition amongst various buckets of tangible as well as intangible assets. Now, what used to happen prior to the advent of Ind AS, the difference between the purchase consideration and the book value of the net assets would entirely get parked into goodwill. And that is something that has changed with the introduction of Ind AS, where first change is actually the progress to fair value. And what is supposed to happen is that we need to allocate the purchase price that is paid amongst the various tangible assets first, and then the intangible assets are something that needs to be recognized. And the balance, if any, that is left is recorded as goodwill or a gain on bargain purchase, depending on what the amount is. So let's visualize this with the help of a quick example here. Say we have a company A, that has acquired company B for a cash consideration of $100 million and also assume certain debt liabilities of the target, let's say worth $120 million. So from a purchase consideration definition standpoint, what we have as the total is a total of $120 million of purchase consideration. Now, what Ind AS indicates is that we need to bifurcate or allocate this 120 million amongst different buckets of assets. So typically, what are those buckets of assets? So what you have as a major buckets are net working capital, which is the difference between your current assets and current liabilities. Then we would have our plant, property, and equipment. That is your tangible fixed assets. Once you have allocated the amount to these two, the fair values of these two buckets, we need to identify and recognize some intangible assets. That's something that we'll get into discussion as we move ahead. And whatever is left after that goes to goodwill. So let's assume these three buckets account for, let's say, $80 million. So the difference between 120 of purchase consideration minus the $80 million which gets allocated to these three buckets, the remaining 40, 120 minus 80 gets allocated to goodwill. So to summarize this, this is a high level picture of what a purchase price allocation is.
Thanks, Faisal. I think that was a good introduction. And with your permission, I'll just make a small edit. Say, while the term purchase price allocation is more associated in the context of IFRS or Ind AS, even in the context of accounting standards framework, which we have been using it for long, and AS 14, we have the purchase method. So even in purchase method, we have something equivalent of purchase price allocation. Probably we don't have this level of guidance, but there also, whatever consideration you bought, 120 in the example which you gave, we allocated to the various assets based on fair values. The difference is identified as goodwill. So historically, we have always had that, but with little more additional guidance and principles being little more tight, including the 1 year period which is there. And in days, it's a little more talked about. Now, Faisal, in the context of Ind AS or IFRS, what is the accounting standards which provide the guidance on purchase price allocation?
Yes. So when it comes to Indian accounting standards, there are two accounting standards that are most relevant for this exercise. The primary one being Ind AS 103, which is business combination. It actually provides for guidance on the accounting and reporting of transactions that qualify as business combinations. So all business acquisitions are accounted for under Ind AS 103 using what they call as the acquisition method of accounting. As you said, something very similar to purchase accounting that we had in the erstwhile gap. The other one being Ind AS 113, which is the fair value measurements. It provides for the definition of what a fair value is and the framework in terms of recognizing and measuring the fair value of tangible as well as intangible assets. So I would say in terms of relevance, these are the two most important accounting standards that one should refer to for guidance related to business combinations as well as fair value framework.
And in the context of Ind AS 103, can you give some guidance on what constitutes business? In 103, it identifies situations where you actually acquire an entity, but it is not a business, but it is an asset acquisition. So can you distinguish the two and give guidance on what situations it would constitute a business, what situations it's an asset acquisition to be dealt with under Ind AS 16?
Yes, this is a very important question actually. And also there is a recent amendment that has been introduced in the definition of the business very recently. So first we need to just understand what does Ind AS 103 states about business combinations. So what it says is that, as I referred to, that all business combinations must be accounted for using a specific method of accounting, the acquisition method. So the key term here that we need to understand is what are business combinations and what constitutes a business within the framework of 103. So what is a business? So in simple terms, if we put it, a business consists of three things. Number one, there needs to be inputs. Number two, there needs to be processes that are applied to those inputs. And finally, then there are outputs from the business. Although businesses would usually have outputs, outputs are not like the essential element for the acquired group of assets to be a business. So what the standards clarify is that for it to be a business combination, there has to be at a minimum two things. Number one, there has to be an input, and we have to have a substantive process that together will contribute to the ability to generate output. So of the three items which constitutes a business, the two are the most important, that's input and a process. So let's understand that with the help of an example again. Let's say we have a company X, which is a pharma company conducting, let's say, in-house R&D activities using its skilled workforce. It also has, obtained an intellectual property right in the form of a patent for certain drugs. While it has some production plant which is ready with approvals, it has not yet commenced commercial production. And therefore, it does not have any revenue at this point in time because commercial production has not yet started. Now, what happens is that there's another company which acquires our company X. So whether does this satisfy the definition of a business or not? So as I said, what we have to see here is that whether there are inputs and processes that are available here, then in that case, it will constitute as a business. So the answer in this case would be yes, because there is a skilled workforce that is working on R&D activities, and that which will contribute, there is also an IPR that will contribute to the ability to generate future outputs. And therefore, in the given case, although the company does not have revenue, it will still constitute to be a business under Ind AS 103. And the same will also apply to a lot of startup or early stage companies, which are pre-revenue companies. And if they are a part of acquisitions, they will still be accounted for as business combinations under Ind AS 103. Now let's quickly talk about what the amendment is. So there is an amendment that has been introduced under Ind AS 103 for periods beginning or on or after 1st of April 2020. That's the first reporting period. So that will be applicable, starting the end of this year, that is 31st March 21. So what it has done is that this amendment has introduced what they call as a concentration test. So even before applying the definition of a business that we just discussed, what they have introduced is called as a concentration test, which means that if any business satisfies the concentration test, you did not go into the framework of business, but rather directly account for that business as an asset acquisition. So what is the concentration test? So the concentration test is actually something that will be assumed to have been met if substantially all of the fair value of the acquired group of assets rests in a single asset or a group of similar identifiable assets. Now, what is substantial is not something that is defined in the gap, but what we understand practically is that at least 90% or approximate of 90% value rests within a group of close or similar identifiable assets will be considered as substantial. So to kind of summarize, what we're doing is there is an option to do, again, we just have to make sure that this is an optional test. So any company for cost saving purposes, if they want to adopt the concentration test, they are well in their right to do that. But if you want to ignore that and just go to the definition of business, that is also something which is permissible. So just to kind of, give you the bigger picture and not lose sight of it, all businesses that fails the concentration test and satisfies the condition of a business will be accounted for as business combinations, and everything else will be accounted for as asset acquisitions.
So very, very nicely explained, Faisal, particularly the recent amendment on the concentration test. You explained it very lucidly. Thank you for that. Just one small observation for clarity. As you are aware, Faisal, unlike US GAAP in Ind AS or IFRS, since it's principle-based, we don't have a bright line for what is substantial. So since almost 1,000 plus members are listening, I just want to clarify to them that Faisal indicated 90% not as a number for us to follow, but more as a general guidance. So I wouldn't like anyone to take it as an authoritative statement. But you very nicely talked about acquisition method, Faisal, and you are aware of the recent discussion paper on business combinations under common control, where we also talk about acquisition accounting versus book value accounting. Can you elaborate a little more about what this acquisition method accounting is all about, and what are the steps which are to be chronologically followed for going through that accounting process? And after that, I would like to come to what Chairman Alind mentioned about an organization like WhatsApp. When you acquire for $17 or $20 billion, you hardly have any physical or tangible or identified assets in the balance sheet. So how do we account for the difference? We'll come to that immediately after this question. But I would like you to give a good conceptual clarity on the acquisition method steps.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, so what Ind AS refers to, as I said, is the acquisition method of accounting for all transactions that qualify as business combinations. So the typical methods the typical steps that one needs to follow in adopting these acquisition methods, there are a few steps, some of them pretty straightforward. The first and foremost being, we need to identify who the acquirer is. Now, this sounds a little straightforward, but it's a little complicated, especially in complex transactions. Like what I said was something like a reverse merger transaction, where you need to identify who the accounting acquirer is, and the same applies for SPAC transactions. There are some complications there where we need to exactly identify what who the accounting acquirer is. Again, a clarification, as Mr. Rakesh said, SPACs currently are not applicable for India, but they might in future become relevant. So just a passing comment there. The next step after we identify the acquirer is to determine what the acquisition date is. Now, acquisition date typically is the date of change of control, that is on the date when the acquirer obtains the control of the acquiree. Now, this again is straightforward in most cases, but things becomes complicated if the agreement identifies the effective date of change of control, which is different from the date on which the transaction is being signed. So there you might just have to make sure that you are aligned on that front as well. The next step after we have identified the acquirer, we have identified the date of change of control, that is the effective acquisition date. The third step is to determine what is the consideration transferred. Again, consideration can come in many forms. It can come in, let's say we have cash, we have equity interest or any other type of assets that are transferred from the acquirer to the acquiree. So we have to make sure we are accounting for the fair value of the consideration transferred at an appropriate fair value as of the acquisition date. Then the next step is that we need to recognize and measure all the tangible assets, like the fixed assets, plant, property, and equipment, and the liabilities assumed, as well as the intangible assets that we will identify, recognize, and measure. And finally, as I also discussed previously, we need to recognize and measure whatever is left after that as goodwill, or that can also be a gain on bargain purchase in case, if it's a bargain purchase transaction. So all in all, just to summarize the major steps: identify the acquirer, determine what the acquisition date is. Third, what is consideration transferred? Then identify all the tangible and intangible assets and recognize them at fair value. And finally, what is left will be recognized as goodwill after allocating everything to the other asset classes.
So just wanted to, get this right in my mind. You said also identify intangible assets and allocate a fair value to that, right?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. So is that not in a way that gets subsumed in the goodwill?
Exactly. So that's the big difference here. What happens is that there's a recognition criteria that has been provided in the accounting standards, and all intangible assets that meets those criteria will not have to be subsumed into goodwill, but rather will show up in the balance sheet as separate intangible assets.
And so I'm assuming an intangible could be an IPR.
Yes. Customer relationship.
Customer relationship is also an intangible asset?
Yes. Trademarks, brand names.
Having say 100 million customers is an intangible asset.
Yes, if you have a history of having relations with those customers, you've been having whether contractual or not, they will still be recognized as an intangible.
And you would actually put that as a different value in the balance sheet.
Absolutely, yes, correct.
Okay.
And
Goodwill will be only that proportion which you are able to command in terms of an incremental pricing, etc. Because you were able to arrive at an incremental pricing because of the goodwill that you carry of 10 years, 15 years. That would be the balance amount left in the goodwill. Is that what it is?
Yes, so that is something that you have paid for as an intangible. Goodwill again is an intangible asset, but because it does not meet the recognition criteria, everything else shows up as goodwill. And a good example to answer your question is an assembled workforce. So if you have acquired a workforce also, workforce separately does not show up on my balance sheet, but rather the assembled workforce will be valued for computational purposes, but will be subsumed into goodwill.
Okay, interesting. So that means we'll end up valuing and doing a fair valuation of intangible assets as well. And again, the fair valuation of the intangibles would be linked to eventually either a revenue stream or some aspects of what it can generate, correct?
Yes.
That means we would have to do a valuation in valuation. One is you valued the business, then you would need to do fair valuation, right?
Absolutely.
Where does it end, MPV? You've created like a nice sport for yourself, for accountants here. Never ending, no?
No, I think just take your own organization, Anil, whether it's an accounting firm or otherwise. You yourself know that there are so many intangibles which are identifiable, which have a finite life. Some of them have a longer life, which is not finite. And then there is goodwill. So let's assume you go through an M&A transaction. You are paying for all of it. So it's only fair that you should identify the values attributed to each of those. So the beauty of IFRS or Ind AS is it doesn't subsume all of this into a single number called goodwill, which is a black box. So people should know, why did I pay that kind of a number? That excess number I paid because of 4 or 5 attributes. Beyond that, it is goodwill. And maybe Faisal will tell a little later that this also need not be done on day one. You actually, when you integrate a business, you actually discover that there's so many other things in that organization which are valuable to you. So you get a runway of 12 months to actually attribute values to that, and then only the difference.
So can you acquire, like I think he spoke about workforce. So do you attribute a value to, say, for example, 5,000 people that you acquired?
No, Anil. Actually, as he was mentioning, he said it has to also cross what is called as a recognition criteria. That is, it should be an identifiable, transferable. It should have certain attributes like that. No,
I'm saying I've acquired an organization with 5,000 people. Very simple.
Correct.
Right? And the 5,000 people merge into my organization today.
Correct.
Would I put a value to that 5,000 people, or I'll not put a value to that 5,000 people?
I would say because it wouldn't fit the recognition criteria of an intangible, that value would get subsumed in goodwill.
The time to acquire 5,000 people today in any market is almost 6 months to 1 year.
Correct.
Right? And sometimes even more. And then time to acquire the relevant skills in the market could even cost you 2 or 3 years or 4 years time.
Good.
So most of the time when you're acquiring an organization, it is also for the skill of the people that you're acquiring.
Superb.
So are we saying that there is no intangible value that can be assigned to that?
I'm enjoying it thoroughly. Just take this one step forward. Let's assume I acquired the 5,000 people and there's a contractual right which says that they cannot leave me for 5 years and they're bound to me. So it's giving, and I can transfer those guys to anybody else, like football players. So I'm acquiring and transferable right. Then you can capitalize as an intangible. But otherwise, if I acquire and they can leave the job tomorrow, and
it's the same story when you acquire 100 million customers. They are your customers today in a SaaS environment, and they may not be your customers in the next 20 days because your services have completely degraded, right? So there is a probability game that 5,000 people leaving the organization tomorrow, possible, not possible. After 3 months, possible, not possible. After 1 year, possible. So I'm saying there would still be some intangible value to it, right? And in today's market, if you ask me, the biggest intangible value that I would probably want to give to any organization is acquire a set of 5,000 people, because you're able to experience and execute something tomorrow. So I don't know whether to allocate an intangible value to this, or finally, because you've not valued this, it would go into a goodwill valuation. So the lines of intangible valuation and the fair valuation and the judgment between a goodwill valuation is very, very, I'm saying it's identifiable, but all these identifiers actually create a goodwill. So a simplistic way was to actually put it in goodwill. We are smarter class of people in this earth. So what we did is we divided them into multiple pieces, and as many as was possible. And I think we could continue to have a debate for almost the entire life to figure out whether, you've allocated the right intangible value to almost all of those items there. And of course, we try and anyway, so that's interesting. So anyway, I'll keep poking you on that. You're saying currently your standards, and of course they're not your standards, but these standards do not provide for giving an intangible value to substantial skill sets that I acquire as a purpose for my M&A transaction. Is that right, if I were to summarize it?
It's right, Anil, unless you can demonstrate that you have a control on that resource and all. So the difference.
So we'll debate this. We'll debate this in your standards.
Let's leave it to
anyway.
Faisal.
So let's leave it to Faisal too.
Today is Faisal.
Yeah, I will enjoy this. Yeah, I'll enjoy this. If this was to last for next 4 hours, I'm going to enjoy this.
I agree. Yes. So Faisal, any takes from your side? Please feel free to chip in before I go to the next question.
Yes, absolutely. So just to add to what Mr. MPV said, is that what happens is that what the gap. So just to take an example of a customer contract. Okay, so you have a contract with the customer to a purchase order. That you will need to supply X number of products for the next 1 year. Now that's a contractual right, and that is something that satisfies the criteria for recognition. But let's say in case of an assembled workforce, what happens is that although you have an employment agreement with the employee, they are free to leave without any repercussions as such. So the gap identifies that slight distinction, but I again, concur with you that
no, it is only so I understand what you're saying and what MPV is saying. I'm saying it's only how should I put it? It is only the demands of the time, and they all keep changing. So while we put standards and principles to it, today, for example, in a particular time in a market, to acquire an organization could have 500 things in somebody's mind. And the first thing maybe today could be, if I acquire this organization, in my mind, the skills is the most important, right? So am I saying that there is no way in your standards that I'll allocate intangible value to it? Or no, it's principle based. I want to allocate some value to it. I will go and allocate some value.
So it's interesting. So what happens is that I'll tell you practically what happens is we actually assign value to assembled workforce for its use as a charge in valuation of other intangible assets. It's just that because it does not meet the recognition criteria, we do not recognize that value in the balance sheet and it's subsumed into goodwill. But you are correct. The way that we determine the value of assembled workforce is actually to look at the productivity cost plus the high.
So I understand this. I'll leave it to MPV's desk, but I'm saying 60 to 70% of the acquisitions in the market is actually fundamentally and strategically for the skills that you acquire in the market. Absolutely. Whether it is Insta, whether it is whatever, it is actually for the skills.
No disconnect with what you're saying. No disconnect. No, completely no disconnect. Yeah. And just for your information, there's a discussion paper on the same topic, which is there internationally for the last 5-6 years. And we have recently debated it at ASB also. And the final word is not yet out. So that's why people tell, should we further break up goodwill to identify these kind of things? But how do we do?
Second, that was not my intent. My intent was, why waste time breaking it in so many intangibles? Allocate it to the goodwill.
I'm coming to the next point. The other point was this goodwill. See, if you take the employee contract one, you have to, the benefits you're going to get of acquiring these 5,000 people next 7 years, 10 years. Whereas goodwill now we only do an impairment test. We don't amortize. So there's a strong argument which people tell. because goodwill includes, just to borrow the percentage which you told, 60% of the time, 70% of the time, it's for this synergy effect, which will get consumed over 6, 7, 8 years. So there's a strong argument that goodwill should only be amortized because it largely comprises this category of asset.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Exactly. So the topic is still live and open.
All right.
And just for information, there's a beautiful paper put up by the International Valuation Standards Council 2019, I think, where they went through this debate and said that this workforce, whatever, in fact, there's a pie chart. I'll see if I can pick up the chart and show it on the screen a little later. Not pie chart, it's a regular chart where this goodwill goes and this workforce synergy goes and sits as part of goodwill. So that's a beautiful chart which IVSC prepared. The second thing, in International Accounting Standards Board, they had a debate on goodwill impairment versus amortization. And to my memory, this is the first occasion where there was a thin majority. They use the expression thin majority. It's 14-member people. Maybe it was 8-6. 8 in favor of impairment, 6 in favor of amortization. That's called a thin majority, you know. So at a discussion paper stage. So this topic is still live and kicking. And the final word is not yet out on that. So the same argument which you said, why should we do this hair splitting? Of course, I don't have this problem. Hair splitting and then write amortize and all. Instead, take the whole thing and keep writing off. Right? Life is simpler. Point taken, Anil. No,
absolutely. No, so fun. So by the way, you know, I'm just trying to copy you so that, you know, I'm trying to assume that I get the same knowledge that you have. And that's why I put my hair behind. Anyway, so this is just an interesting chat, but please take that forward, MPV. Thank you.
Thanks, Anil. So Faisal, can you spend a couple of minutes giving guidance on what constitutes purchase consideration and the components of purchase consideration, because that's the key number which we are going to allocate. So can you give some thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So purchase consideration, so in what Ind AS does is that in the context of all the items that we discuss and recognize on the balance sheet, it asks us to determine the fair value. Now, what is purchase consideration? It is something that is transferred in a business combination transactions for acquiring another entity is what you pay. That is known as the purchase consideration. But in this case, it's not so straightforward. What happens is that what Ind AS says is that you need to determine the fair value of each component of the consideration transferred at its acquisition date fair value. So typically what happens is that once we go through the pointers or the components of it, you will understand, you know, what we are trying to refer to. So while thinking of these things, you know, I tend to think of them more like buckets again, which when in this case, the first bucket would include everything that is transferred by the acquirer to the former owners of the acquiry in their capacity as shareholders. So there are two things in the first point itself. One is from the acquirer to the owners of the acquiry. Next is their capacity as shareholders. So first is anything that is transferred includes your cash, equity shares that are transferred by the acquirer to the acquiry, or any other asset that may be transferred. The second important point to note here is that only in their capacity as shareholders. So say, for example, if the acquiring company requests one of the CEOs or the shareholders to continue into the business post-acquisition for a next number of years. So anything that is tied to post-combination services to be provided by the acquirers or the owners of the seller's entity will not be capitalized in purchase consideration, but rather will go into the P&L as a period expense. So that's the first bucket. The next bucket is earnouts or also contingent consideration. That is any future deferred payment that is typically triggered by, let's say, achievement of future milestones. What are typical milestones? It could be like, event driven, like your R&D milestones, product needs to achieve any financing milestones, or even revenue or EBITDA targets that needs to be achieved. The third bucket here would be any non-controlling interest, especially in case of acquisition that is for less than 100% stake. So let's say if the company acquires 80% in another company, you need to determine the fair value of the remaining 20% that is with other shareholders and add that to your purchase consideration. And finally, the fourth item is the liabilities that are incurred by the acquirer to the former owners of the acquiry. So to sum up what the purchase consideration would include broadly will be: number one, everything that's transferred by the acquirer to the owners of the acquiree. Number two, earnouts or contingent consideration. Third, any non-controlling interest stake that is left in the business. And finally, the liabilities that are incurred by the acquirer. So all of these four together would sum up what is called as the purchase consideration. And another side note that we just want to know what India states is that anything transaction cost, like let's say for example, investment bankers fees, lawyers fees, or anything like that, will not be capitalized as purchase consideration, but rather we will go into the P&L as a post combination or a period expense.
So Faisal, Sarika, can you please ask the technical person to enable screen share? I'll just show that IVSC slide, but in between.
Just a second, sir.
Yeah, in between.
Please make
Faisal, say, yeah. So Faisal, as far as the transactions goes, my experience, particularly the last 10-15 years, almost all transactions come with earnouts and contingent consideration.
Absolutely.
So how do we include earnouts, contingent consideration for the purpose of purchase price allocation?
Okay. So are you referring to how do we determine the fair value, or how do we include that in the purchase consideration?
We can first go for fair value. I think now the screen is on. I'll just give you a second, Faisal. Anil, this was the slide I was showing. This is not mine. This is from the IVSC. And this has been widely circulated across the world for discussion. So they went through a huge research on goodwill, and they concluded that goodwill is an asset which generally appreciates over time, and hence it should not be subject to an amortization. Rather, an impairment is a better test. So that is their conclusion. So they're talking about the components of goodwill: reputation, future intangible value, workforce, which what you mentioned as the biggest one. Waste, while employees per se are wasting, that is their aging happens and all, but the knowledge base is not a wasting asset. So
no, so well, I think that's a fair question. I'm only saying that when you acquire an organization, you acquire a goodwill which eventually gets subsumed in your own goodwill, right? So tomorrow when you were to get valued, you will not get valued A plus B. You will get valued C only, right? Because somebody is going to look at you as an overall organization. So ideally, a goodwill eventually should get subsumed. Like there's a bell curve for everything, and the value that you get out of this reputation, workforce would eventually get subsumed in your reputation and your workforce. And ideally, it should be impaired for the fact that you paid for it and it has to be properly accounted. So anyway, I think that's a larger debate, which I'm sure we would have some other day. Not to trouble Faisal and pull him into this discussion at this point in time. But we would love to have this conversation maybe at a later time. I'm only saying from a simplistic perspective, it becomes easier for somebody to put the value all into a goodwill. And then, of course, not getting too much into an impairment test, make sure that you amortize it because it gets subsumed or whatever. But I'm sure there will be pros and cons for all of that. So of course, we will probably debate it some other time.
No, actually, there's one point that I want to add here. So in the United States, what they've come up with is that there's a private company council that has come up with certain exceptions for private companies. So as you rightly said, especially for cost savings, like a cost benefit analysis, what they have suggested is that especially for companies of X size, they need not value certain intangibles like customer relationships and non-competes. Rather, you can just record everything as goodwill and just identify some basic intangibles. So that's also something that you might want to know.
We have the same principle here, Faisal. We literally follow the same thing here. In any case, good. So over to you, Faisal, on including earnouts, contingent consideration as part of the overall fair value.
Absolutely. Yeah. So determining, what we call as the fair value of contingent consideration, because that is deferred payment tied to certain events or conditions or performance milestones, it's always a challenging task. But generally, what you will see is that there are two methodologies that are widely used in practice. Without getting into too much details about what these techniques are, I will just give you a brief. So the first one is what we call as the scenario-based method, and the other one is an option pricing technique. So first, talking about the scenario-based method, it involves developing discrete scenarios, especially in cases where the trigger for the payment is event-driven. And what can be those events? Events, as I said, it could be events like, you need to get a financing done, X round of financing done in X number of days or months or years. Or it could be you need to achieve an R&D milestone in an X period, X amount of time. Then once you have these scenarios develop, let's say high case, best case, and low case, then these scenarios are then probability weighted and discounted using an appropriate discount rate back to the date of acquisition to come up with its fair value. So let's say, there is a contingent payment that is triggered by a drug achieving an R&D milestone for a company A. So what the company would do is that for scenario-based modeling, it would come up with the scenarios of when it is likely that the target or the milestone will be achieved and use the scenario-based method along with the probabilities to come up with a fair value. That's our first technique. Number two is the option pricing method, which you can say is a very similar concept, but it rather uses an option pricing framework to determine the fair value of contingent consideration. Because the option pricing framework deals in risk neutral pricing, it eliminates the need to come up with a discount rate because we use the risk-free rate, and also replaces the need for developing scenarios with a volatility assumption. Now, when is this most relevant? The option pricing technique is especially when the payment figure is correlated to the market. Say, for example, if there is a company where the payout of contingent consideration is tied to an event of achievement of, let's say, a revenue target or an EBITDA target for the next couple of years. In that case, it will be best to use an option pricing methodology as opposed to, a scenario-based methodology where you have discrete cash flow scenarios.
Thanks, Faisal. Faisal, we've received questions from participants. So
amazing questions, yeah. I was just going through them, and they're all to the mark kinds, yeah. Fantastic.
I want to start with the very first question, for which I don't have an answer, but I'll take the benefit of your expertise. During deflation, should fair value or purchase price be considered?
So fair value is not something, it's always what you're trying to suggest is that fair value is something that represents the best price, or rather an exit price, based on the definition and the current economic and market environment. So if there is a fair value, if you are actually doing a fair valuation, it will appropriately reflect the deflationary price pressure on the value of the asset. As opposed to carrying everything on a cost basis, if you actually do a fair value, you are automatically reflecting the deflationary pressures. So I would say yes, absolutely. Even in case of a deflationary environment, just have to make sure that all of those events and the economic pressures are appropriately being accounted for when you sit down to fair value.
The next question is there any guidance note of Institute on purchase price allocation? The answer is no. And this is the question to you, Faisal, regarding acquisition in joint ventures or associates. That is where we follow the equity method. Should we use the same purchase price allocation principles of Ind AS 3 or Ind AS 103 or IFRS 3? Can we apply IFRS 3 principles since there is no control in the acquisition?
No, so it does not apply to that. So there are exceptions to 103, which counts. I think joint venture is one of them, but I don't exactly recollect. But there are certain exceptions there, which is very straightforward. So I think joint venture is, I guess, one of them because it does not acquire a control.
Yeah, and then again, one word answer: would business combinations apply only to manufacturing firms or also to service firms?
No, even to service firms. So any scenario where you acquire.
The next one is a very interesting question, Faisal. How to work out the fair value accounting, where acquirer is purchasing the whole business of 3 product lines, but he intends to continue only one product line. So the price paid for the 2 discontinued units, will it be goodwill or is it adjusted separately in any other reserve?
Okay. So now another interesting concept, as we move along the discussion, is that fair value is a market-based measurement and not entity's own specific measurement. So what it means is that the entity's own intended use is not something that will be considered while determining the economic fair value. So what we will do is that we will consider the fair value as if like what a typical market participant would do. So let's say we identify industry players who would have continued all the three products. So while determining the fair value, we will determine as if the business was to be continued. So we determine all the fair values of each of these product lines. And finally, after, I think we recognize everything on day one, but after what the company is, let's say, intending to discontinue, then that amount could be written off directly on the next day itself. Yeah.
Then there's a question on what is special purpose acquisition companies in the context of acquiring method.
So just to get that on the same page in my mind, which is perfect. I think what Faisal has said is perfect. That's what you would practically do. But essentially, the acquirer's mind was what? They always wanted to discontinue two products. So is that the value that they are assigning to the organization or the goodwill eventually, or not? Because why would somebody want to have a fair value allocated to something which was not even my intent when I'm acquiring the company? That was what I'm trying to say is my clear intent of acquiring the company was not to value those two product lines, but to value the first one. And eventually I've landed up paying 100 crores for that first one. Is that a way to look at it or not?
Even if, let's say in your example, even if you did not want it to, so effectively what's happening is it's called as a defensive intangible asset that you have acquired. So you have acquired, so I'm kind of jumping the gun, but just to give an example, let's say Coca-Cola and Thumbs Up. So Coca-Cola acquired Thumbs Up, where they did not, assuming they did not want it to continue it then, but they've actually paid for that brand, right? They've actually paid cash for that brand. So what they would do is that value Thumbs Up as if it was to be continued, allocate value to that, and then write it off because the accounting intention or the company's own intention is actually to discontinue the use.
But then fundamentally, is that not going against the accounting principle? Because there is value which remains, there is residual value, not even residual value. There is substantial value which continues to remain in the business because I have acquired Thumbs Up. Maybe because my brand has gone up, maybe because my sales has gone up, maybe because I have acquired the market share of Thumbs Up, and then of course I'm going to push Coke in there. So there has got that value which still continue to remain, right? So fundamentally, is my accounting not going wrong?
But what's happening is that your own goodwill, that's Coca-Cola's own goodwill, keeps going up, right? Because of that internal calibration, if you exclude that, Coca-Cola's own share will continue to go up. So that's actually being reflected in your own value rather than in the value of Thumbs Up, because that's a discontinued brand now.
That's true. Okay, possible. All right, cool. Thank you.
In fact, there's quite a good amount of guidance on that, Anil, in terms of how you need to see this from a market participants approach and an exit value for each of the individual assets.
All right.
So, otherwise, what will happen is the other two divisions, that cost will come and sit as part of goodwill, which is actually not the goodwill belonging to that business.
Which is fundamentally right. I'm saying you've acquired it, but when I'm acquiring it, I know I'm not going to use these two products, which means I had something else on my mind. I mean, I would not be giving a value of that company. That means I've overvalued my first product, right? Yeah. In some way, I've actually allocated more price to the first product, right? Because somebody would not be stupid enough to just take two products, pay for it, and not continue, right? So anyway, I'm only trying to say that where does it actually fundamentally sit in?
Very valid point. As Faisal rightly explained, this is actually resulting in your own internal goodwill going up, and that value cannot be increased. That accounting is.
No, I'm only saying from an accounting perspective, you have written off, which means yes, fundamentally Faisal is right. It could add to my value. Eventually, I'm acquiring an organization to my value, but I have written off that huge amount of money in the first year, right? Which technically, by your standards, I mean, I'm saying by the Ind AS or the IFRS standards, should ideally have been over a period of time, or should have been sitting in the goodwill, which you will continue to test for impairment. So ideally, in your line of argument, it should actually be sitting in the goodwill and rather not sitting in the fair value and depreciating. It is what I was trying to think through. That.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, but anyway, I think that's fair. I think you would, as a step, value it, and then you'll say you'll depreciate it. Maybe conservatism holds. So which is fair enough.
Correct. So Faisal, I was talking about, you did explain this.
This looks like engineering, MPV. I keep telling you, no, accounting standards is actually no different than engineering. And I've started to coin a word for chartered accountants, business engineers.
Okay.
Interesting.
Fine. So we will discuss that later. So Faisal, in the context of special purpose acquisition companies and the acquisition method, the interplay, you talked about reverse merger and all. I think member is asking more clarity on that.
Sorry, I missed the last part. So
the member is asking more clarity on the interplay between SPACs and acquisition accounting. You did mention earlier, and probably I'll drop that hint, that those cases mostly it ends up with the accounting acquirer being different from a legal acquirer.
Yes, absolutely.
I think the member is wanting some clarity on that.
Correct. So what happens is that in case of a SPAC, there is an entity there is an entity which gets listed first. Just to give you a background on what a SPAC is, entity gets listed first, it acquires funds from the public, and then it finds a right target and merges into that. So what happens is that there is a merger, but the remaining entity is actually the one that is being acquired. That is the entity that remains. So from an accounting perspective, the acquirer could also be the acquired entity. So the responsibility of reporting then lies with the acquired entity, and that's how you identify the accounting acquirer. So there are complications to that depending on what the structure is.
So the next question is why SPACs are not there in India? I think it's just happening. I think SEBI would put in regulations soon, and I personally believe it's just probably 18 to 24 months before we see SPACs actually being there in India. And what is the bargain purchase? That's the next question. You can explain, Faisal.
Yes, so bargain purchase is actually the other side of the coin of goodwill. So you have actually acquired more assets than how much you have paid for. That's not a regular. I think only 10% of the transaction might have it, or even 5%. But the most common that you see, it will always be goodwill, where you have paid a little more than what the fair value of assets you have acquired. So bargain purchase is actually the opposite of that.
And how do we value customer relationships?
How do we value customer relationship? Yeah, so customer relationship, just like any other intangible asset, there is a big process that you will get into. But just to give you an example, because customer relationship are revenue generating or cash flow generating asset, they will most typically be valued using an income approach analysis, like a discounted cash flow or excess earnings method. In rare cases, if you have some references to a market price of how much it pays to acquire a customer list or customer contract, then you can look at a market approach also, but very seldomly a market approach is used. And similarly, cost approach is not something that will be very routinely used. Only if you have some indications in a market for a cost, then you would use that. So primary is income approach, followed by a market or a cost approach.
So Faisal, there's a question now.
And just to get a little more clarity on the customer acquisition, I think it's a very important and interesting subject. You would also, of course, put the variables like customer retention there. I'm sure you would also put the value of over a period of, say, last 5 years, the cohort charts would say, okay, the next customer coming in on the first year is able to give you, say, maybe more business, less business over a period of 4 or 5 years. All of those factors would go into your revenue recognition stream, because you would have identified a set of customers, say 100 million today, right? And you're valuing these 100 million. So maybe 1 or 2 ingredients that would go into, looking at the revenue stream. Or is it just pure revenue stream?
No. So there will be, as you said, retention ratios that we consider, like what is the survivor curve for that customer relationship or a group of customers. And also it's important to understand that they will most likely have a finite life customers, right? So if you have acquired, let's say 100 customers, they will continue to give you business for the next 10 years, 7 years, 5 years, whatever is the life, depending on your historical experience with them or your expectation of business from them into the future. So you have those, factors that you will have to consider, like a finite life, retention rates, how much new business can the new customers give you or the old customers can give you. That relative ratio is also something that you will look at.
I think, Sarika, this could be an interesting topic for our valuation again on one of these days. and maybe in a little shorter term future, but we could again invite Faisal and maybe just talk about customer valuation and what are the ingredients that go in there. Because in today's market, and especially in India and the China market, consumers and customers and large numbers play a very important role, which eventually, of course, also go and sit in the evaluation. But yeah, I thought this was just a side item, but I thought it was very interesting. So back to you, MPV.
So Faisal, what is the definition of self-generated goodwill? And does it mean brands, trademarks, patents are self-generated goodwill? So this is a question from the participant.
So self-generated goodwill would be something, that's like organically generated while you are running the business, and that's not something that will show up anytime on the balance sheet per se, but it will add to your fair valuation in case there was a transaction of acquisition of that company. But brand names or trade names, some intangibles like internally developed technology, if those meet the recognition criteria as per GAAP, like the capitalization criteria, then those will be recorded on the books depending on how they satisfy those criteria. So they are a little different, but I think depending on what the purpose is, you will want to look at it accordingly.
Yeah. And Anil, just to refer to that 5,000 employees question, I think one of the members has given an observation in point number 16. You can go through it. Okay. So Faisal, the other question is, how do companies derive or decide at fair consideration amount as PPA valuation, which actually shows true value of business is done post business transfer agreement execution?
Typically, there will be hardly any cases where you will have any reason to believe, because the transactions are happening between unrelated parties. So you would assume that the transaction price is at fair value. That's the premise of value that you go in with first, unless you have reasons to believe that there was a distressed sale, that the transaction price would not reflect the fair value. So the primary assumption, because it's happening between two unrelated parties, the initial premise is that the transaction price is fair considering the future expectation of revenue or cash flows from that business.
Okay. So Faisal, can you spend a little time on, in the context of Ind AS, what constitutes fair value? And while on the same topic, Anil also referred this in the context of the 3 units and all. The concept of market participants. What is that concept and why is it so important?
Absolutely. I think this is a very important premise of valuation and the one that we also face most from our clients. I think Anil hit the nail right on its head. And this is one question that we also keep getting from our clients way too often, as to why you are not considering entities' own specific assumptions, right? So what happens is, first we start with just the definition of fair value. Now, Ind AS 113 defines fair value as the price that you would receive to sell an asset or transfer a liability from the perspective of a market participant. So the key thing to note here are two. Number one is that the price that you would receive to sell the asset. So what it is actually referring to is that what they call it as an exit price, which means that you already have an asset. And if you want to exit or liquidate that asset, how much would you receive? And or you have a liability, how much you will have to pay to someone to take over your liability. That is referred to as exit price. Now, conceptually, what happens is this is different from the transaction or an entry price where you don't own the asset and you want to go out and purchase that asset. So there is a very fine line. It's not a bright line, but it's important to understand what is the premise of value that we are dealing with. Accordingly, you can specify those assumptions. Now, as I said, in one of my responses was that the standards very specifically emphasize that the fair value is a market-based measurement and not the entity's own specific measurement, which means that as such, management's intended use of the asset, if it is different from what a market participant would typically do, then it will not be considered in measuring the fair value. Instead, what we will do is that the fair value will be determined based on a hypothetical transaction between market participants from their perspective. Okay. Now, how do we identify? First question that comes to mind is that how do you identify these market participants and where do you locate them? So market participant is defined under Ind AS 113 where it states that these are the buyers and the sellers of the assets and the liability, and they are economically interested in that assets and liability in a principal or an advantageous market. Now, market participant can be of two types. One, they can be strategic buyers or they can be financial buyers. Strategic buyers would typically include your peer sets, the seller entities, peer sets or competitors. Whereas on the financial side of things, the financial buyers would include individual investors, private equity investors or venture capital firms, and even in some cases, financial institutions like banks, if they are investing in. But just to give you a practical sense of how do we identify market participant is that we do a similar exercise that we do for finding comparable companies. We identify a set of peer companies that are operating in the same niche industry domain and create a list of those. And for verifying all of our assumptions, whether they kind of, concur with what the expectation is for market participant, we compare something like revenue growth rates, EBITDA margins, long-term growth rates, and all prospects of the business that the entity is claiming and whether they align with the market participants' point of view or not. So that's how we would typically go about things.
Very helpful, Faisal. Very helpful. While on the same page, can you elaborate the next step of the concept of highest and best use, popularly what we refer as HABU, highest and best use, in the context of fair value determination?
Yes. Again, these concepts are very interrelated. Another premise of value that we need to adopt is that we need to look at the asset and consider its highest and best use when trying to determine the fair value. This is, a little counterintuitive, but, once you understand this, it will start to make sense. Highest and best use would refer kind of, to the use of an asset, which would maximize the value of an asset. Okay. So, just like I was giving the example of Coca-Cola and Thumbs Up, even in case, let's say Coca-Cola wanted to discontinue Thumbs Up at the time when it acquired it. But the highest and best use of the asset, highest and best use by a market participant would be to continue to monetize that asset. So if either of the scenarios, whatever generates the highest value for the asset, that is something that we need to consider. Whether be it its use as defensive intangible, if it generates a X value, versus if its commercial use generates a Y value, whichever is the highest is something that we need to consider while determining the fair value. And that is precisely the concept of highest and best use in the light of how a market participant would see that.
Okay, good. There's a question from a member here. Intellectual property rights relating to some invention or research associated with certain specific employees have a tangible value, which cannot be measured by keeping the employees under bond. How do we deal with those situations?
So from again, we will run those intangibles. So let's say, there is a personal goodwill that's tied to, the owners of the business, something that is tied to owners of the business. And there is no contractual right. So you would enter into something like a non-compete with those employees. Then it's not the intangible that, if they go away and they try to compete with the business. So the intangible that would be recognized is not the value of the technology or the harm that they can do to the business, but rather it would be the opportunity cost that you are saving by entering into a non-compete and them not internally cannibalizing your business. So that is something that's how you will value a non-compete.
Okay. And then there's a question on, is purchase price allocation valuation required if a holding company transfers its business to a wholly owned subsidiary? And how will the difference, if any, be accounted?
So there are certain caveats under Ind AS 103 for common control transactions. So in this case, if it falls under common control transaction, that it is out of scope of 103. So then PPA would not be applicable if it's a common control entity.
Yeah. I just have a request for this member, since you have interest in this point. As Faisal just mentioned, in Ind AS, we have an Appendix C, which talks about book value accounting for situations like this, because it's scoped out of 103. And internationally, it's scoped out, but there is no guidance. But there's a discussion paper which is now open for sharing comments, which talks about some situations to follow acquisition method, some situations to follow book value method. If you have any thoughts, we'll be happy if you could send your notes by tomorrow. The last date for sharing comments is 1st of September. We'll be happy to receive your thoughts since you have interest in this question. Now, Faisal, going back to the 3 product lines example, in the case study of 3 product lines and one to be continued, if the company is intending to carry only one line of service, won't the company just buy that specific line of service? If the company is paying for all the 3 lines, it means it's a member's understanding. Members' understanding is that all the 3 are not separable, and then accordingly the company would impair the remaining 2 lines of services, just like what you told Faisal. Didn't a similar situation arise when HLL acquired Tomco?
But exactly. So what happens is that it depends on the intention of the company and the kind of product line. So if it's not separable, then the company will accordingly take those into consideration. But at this point in time, for the example of 3 product lines, our understanding was that these are independent service or products that the company is intending to continue or discontinue. So accordingly, if those are separable, then yes, the value that is assigned to those 3 product lines will have to be impaired from the next day itself.
Good. The other question from members is purchase price allocation applicable in the case of slump sale?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is. So slump sale is actually something, what happens is that it refers to a sale for a lump sum consideration without values being actually assigned to individual assets and liabilities. But if you see that from an acquirer's perspective, the acquiring entity is actually acquiring a variety of assets and liabilities in that case as well. So hence, if it is actually satisfying the definition of a business as we just discussed under 103, then yes, PPA will have to be done even in case of a slump sale.
Again, a very important question, Faisal, and I'm sure Anil will have some thoughts on this surely. And at the risk of being an extended conversation, I'm still asking this. The tax amortization benefit on intangible assets. So how do we include it for the purpose of purchase price allocation? And while I'm not expecting an answer around income tax, we had a situation where we did many business acquisitions where we acquired goodwill, assuming a tax amortization benefit is there. And last year we had a tax law amendment which says, forget about all that. Forget about all that. So can you share your conceptually, what is this tax amortization benefit or TAB as it's referred? I'm just using that jargon because Anil, you wouldn't believe, way back in 2007, I was in ASB as a co-opted member, and there was a discussion going on Buscomb. So for almost a good 1.5 hours, I just didn't understand what it was. I was trying my best. I tried in Google, no luck at the time. And later, with hesitation, I asked what it is, and I came to know it is business combination. So similarly, people now don't talk about tax amortization benefit. Have you considered TAB on intangibles? Intangibles. And I had one deal about 3 years back. You won't believe, Anil. Just because of the TAB, the deal value, the moment you convince the investor that there's a TAB value available to him, the deal value actually went up by 40%. So, but he required to mention that the benefit is available. So, Faisal, can you throw some light?
So, what you're trying to say, it's not so much in business here, but it is in so much of the value that you get because of the TAB, whatever it is, that you're willing to pay extra for that. So exactly. I wouldn't know. And like you said, at the risk of extended conversation, I don't know where to end this, man. Anyway, Faisal, I think to you, please. Yeah.
Sure. So as you said, tax amortization benefit, also known as TAB, it refers to the benefit of income tax savings that results from the amortization of intangible assets. So that's typically conceptually what it is. So the logic here is that when the purchaser of an intangible asset is allowed to amortize the price of an asset as an expense for tax purposes, the value of the asset is enhanced by the present value of future tax savings. the idea is very analogous to the treatment of something like a depreciation expense in, let's say, an NPV calculation. So while we are doing the calculations for a business enterprise, we have these net present value calculations where we deduct depreciation expense, which results in tax savings. Now, what happens is that whenever we sit down to value financial value, intangible assets for financial reporting purposes, there is always something like a tab which needs to be included, because the premise again for the value is that there will be market participant who will try to maximize the value from the asset. So regardless of the deal structure, whether it's an asset deal or a stock deal, you will always include tab. An important thing to note is tab will be dependent upon the type of methodology that you choose to fair value. So income approach, you will include tab, but tab will not be included in a market approach analysis because the multiples are expected to account for the benefit on account of tab amortization benefit. And in case of a cost approach, it's actually it's not like a bright line, but it's a gray area there. There are two schools of thought, whether you include benefit of taxation or tab. That's a lengthy discussion, but just to tell you that there is proponents for including the tab benefit versus, there are also people who say that you should not include tab benefit depending on the cost approach. So income
how can there be a tax benefit here foundationally and fundamentally? Of course, there are dollars connected to this, so there's no doubt about it. But I'm saying fundamentally, there should be nothing like a tax benefit. I mean, you're paying tax on what you're earning and you're acquiring something. And as it is run the business, right? Fundamentally, it is run the business, right?
No, I mean, as Faisal was mentioning, when you follow an income approach, which is basically a DCF approach.
No, I understand. Faisal has, I think, put it beautifully. So there is no disconnect with what Faisal is saying. It's fundamentally right, and I mean the way that it's been structured as of date. So there is no doubt about it. And I think what you guys are trying to tell, well, not me, but to the viewers, is that tab also is kind of an intangible asset. Is that right? Is my understanding right? And
is like enhancing the value of intangibles. Yeah.
So no. So does it mean that you put that in the balance sheet in terms of an item, saying that you're allocating the value for it as an intangible? No, that's not the.
No.
It's enhancing the intangibles. I understand that. All right, fair.
Yeah. So if let's say a fair value of intangible comes to $100, then you
Correct.
will add a factor of tab.
You will add a factor of the tax element to it.
Yes. So let's say 15% is the value accretion. So the total value of the intangible becomes 115.
Sure. So when you're valuing intangibles, you would also consider the tax benefit of it and add it to the intangible value. And that is what would drive your total value on the bottom.
Absolutely.
No, fair enough. Well, fundamentally, I think it is a delusion because there should nothing be like a tax benefit. But anyway, again, these are all.
Why not, Anil? What happened to you? Why not? Because you are paying for it, and it's an asset you are consuming like any other asset. Why should you not get taxed?
So fundamentally, the value of the asset and an intangible, my view again could be completely wrong. You've debated this more than me, so you would know that. If I'm acquiring a value of an asset, cannot be hypothetically incremented by a tax saving that I am going to arrive at. A value of it.
I'll make it simple. I'll make it simple. Just imagine I'm buying an asset for which there is no tax benefit. I'm buying an asset for which there is a tax benefit. I would obviously pay a little more, no, when I have a tax benefit.
I'm saying MPV. Fundamentally, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm saying if you look at it dispassionately, my acquisition cost of the intangible should be the cost of the intangible, right? Taxation is an aspect. Of course, it's man-made, but I'm saying taxation is an aspect that you add to that, and because you're saving maybe some dollars, you're willing to pay that extra price for that intangibles in your mind. But I'm saying fundamentally, when Faisal would have probably valued the intangible on a standalone basis, that would not carry the value of the tax. So for example, if I were to sell it to you and you have an opportunity to claim tax, you would give it more value. If I were to sell it to Faisal, who does not have an opportunity, he's also like Zomato losing a lot of money. He does not have the benefit of tax. Where would that go in? It would not go in again anywhere. So if you look at it very, differently, I'm saying tax is just a engineering value that you're allocating to it is what I was trying to say. Nothing more than that. It is like, these transactions used to happen in the market that you go and buy the power asset, which has got a 10-year free taxation. And that is why the cost of the power or maybe the project becomes viable, which never became viable in the world, right? It only becomes viable with what it has and what it doesn't have. So with something that you have a tax or nothing doesn't become viable, or suddenly it doesn't have more value or less value to it. So anyway, that's just a fundamental discussion. But I think Faisal really explained it very well.
It's actually music to the finance minister's ears. And, okay, good.
So anyway, yeah.
We're almost at the end. So let me take some important questions from members which are there. So Faisal, maybe quick rapid fire kind of answers will help. Can SPAC be incorporated in GIFT City to acquire Indian companies planning the SPAC route? If you have an answer.
No, I don't have an answer to this one. Yeah. I'm not exactly aware of this one.
Yeah, I'm not aware. Next, how the company acquired under NCLT will be accounted for under Ind AS 103?
There will be no difference per se. Accounting standards do not make a difference per se. So if it satisfies the definition of a business, it will be accounted for.
What is excess earning method of intangible asset? We'll keep it rapid fire so that I can collect as many questions.
Excess earning is you are trying to isolate the earnings for a specific intangibles without actually identifying what are the cash flows directly associated.
The acquirer has acquired a part of target company, which was earlier supplying goods to the other entities of target company. Part of the deal, the target company agrees to purchase goods from acquirer for say next 5 years. Will any value be assigned to it in acquirer's books?
Yes, any pre-existing relationship between the acquirer and the acquiree will accordingly be allocated value.
Okay. While allocating purchase price on tangible, intangible assets, etc., are liabilities reduced from purchase price and then allocated on assets, or is purchase price presumed to have taken into consideration the liabilities?
Purchase price includes liabilities and it's actually added to the purchase consideration.
Yeah. And in customer valuation, can we use terminal value if company is of assumption that at least X% of customers will continue for a long-term future?
I would, face a difficult time with the auditors to justify that. So, not really a perpetual life for customers.
So, last question: how do we deal with a situation where the highest and best use of an asset is not in line with the prime objectives and purpose of company? Does the situation arise practically?
Absolutely. A lot of times, as I said, in case of a defensive intangible, we saw that example where the intended use was different from the highest and best use. So the economic value will be determined considering highest and best use, but the treatment in the books of accounts will be based on what the intended use of the asset is.
So Anil, I've tried to keep it as many as possible before 12:30. I'll leave it to you for concluding remarks.
No, thank you so much, MPV. Fantastic. I think I enjoyed this conversation, and I think I must tell you that, Faisal, I'm not sure. Were you an academician before you actually got into this? Because, were you one by any chance?
No.
No, because the way that you, spoke about something and summarized it very well, I think if you do want to consider an alternative career, being an academician and walking into MPV shoes could be a good career for you, because, you were able to talk through all of that, create complexity, and then suddenly, make it very simple and summarizing it very well. So I think this was a fantastic discussion that I've had so far, and I really enjoyed my conversation. And just as an afterthought in a lighter way, MPV, about our tax benefit, what happens if the government is used to doing retrospective taxation changes? I don't know how you're going to deal with that in your standards, and do you rewrite the books again, or you do something around it? So I think it is pure engineering, and we'll enjoy discussing and debating this as we go forward. But I think once again, I think we had a wonderful day today. Beautiful questions. I mean, I would say really, striking questions coming in from our viewers. So they are pretty glued on. So I think thank you so much, Faisal. I would want Sarika to do the honors, but I enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Faisal, specifically for sitting opposite to MPV, sir. for accounting versus valuation. So
Yeah, difficult, man.
All credit goes to you while explaining the concepts on fair value purchase price allocation. It may seem like it is a small topic, but it is a comprehensive topic where all intangibles are captured. So thank you, Anil Bhandari sir. Thank you, MPB sir. Thank you, Sehgal sir. Thank you all the participants. As we all know that we have already conducted, this is our 14th VCM. And from 10,000, 15,000 participants, today again we have, because it's a specific topic, today again we have close to 2,000 people live with us. So
Lovely.
maintaining this number after 14th week is really, I'm very excited to have this.
And for the first time,
Sarika,
Sarika, I realized the hard work that MPB is doing in the council. I had no idea. I don't know how does he spend his time debating and discussing, one topic for like 6 hours. Yeah. So MPB, to my understanding, at least, congratulations that you're able to withhold these kind of debates that you would probably have. Of course, you don't have me there to debate with you, but you would have so many people coming in with different angles. Fantastic.
yes, sir. And we may now discuss and think about having spreadsheet sessions. We may not have it on Sundays, but we may have some spreadsheet sessions, because almost most of the topics we have captured, like disclaimers, limitations, do's and don'ts of valuation reports, expectation of the regulator, then learnings from judicial pronouncements, learnings from peer review valuation reports, whether DCF is the most commonly used method under Companies Act as well as Income Tax Act, ESOP, due diligence and valuation dates specifically. We are coming out with a calendar on valuation dates. Where is a trigger point when a valuer has to see that the valuation will be done, or a company has to see that I have to appoint a registered valuer to get this valuation done. So this is something we are coming out with, and let us see. I'll discuss when we will come back. We can't promise to come back next week, but let us see when.
No, so Sarika, I think let us just continue with our topics on Sundays. We could get deeper, or we could go back to 80,000 feet wherever is required, picking up different areas. Intangible valuation with maybe some specific interest, right? Could be an interesting idea as well. Or maybe a case study that we could think through, which has been acquired and how the accounting actually happened or whatever, and could be again discussion mode. And let's pick up one of these items now to actually deep dive. For example, we did the brand, we can deep dive and we can do one session or 2 sessions every month to trying to do on a Excel basis or on a presentation mode or something like that. So let's continue the good work. I think this topic is as complex as it is and would always be engaging.
Yeah.
I think if you were to do DCF 10 times over, Sarika, people will still have questions for us, right?
Sir, but I can't bring Pramod Jain sir again for 3 months.
Oh yeah, because he would be contesting, and of course, maybe this could also be one of my last sessions here. But that doesn't mean. I think we continue on all Sundays. Myself and MPVs could be, but I'm saying we continue with our sessions, and I'm sure we will find another moderator or somebody to maybe carry on this tradition of asking the easy or the tough questions. But we would want to make sure that we continue these sessions every Sunday. You still continue to have the hard work to do, Sarika, so we're not letting you go from scripting it.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Anil Bhandari sir, MPV sir, Faisal, of course, for taking up so interesting a session.
So we just want to tell the viewers that it's possible that because of the 1st September guidelines for the council elections, which are likely to be due in this December 2021, and because of the guidelines and because we would have to follow the election code, we, myself, MPV, may not be there from the 1st of September on every Sunday going forward until we finish our elections, and maybe all the way up to January. So it is almost the next or the best part of the year. But we would make sure that this session continues to go on with very interesting introductions by Rakeshji and, of course, summarization by Sarika. And I'm sure we would find somebody who would be engaging enough to make sure that we have this conversational discussion on Sundays being carried with valuation experts because I think I really enjoyed this, and I'm hoping that our viewers continue to enjoy the sessions with the interesting questions that they ask. This is just for information, nothing else. Thank you, Sarika. I thought I might just want to get this right. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you all of everyone. Have a nice Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Faisal. Bye.